Thank you. First things first, Brad, I just want to say that more so than any time in my career, it's been so fun to be in blockchain because so many friends are partnered with us. It's just such a fun thing. It's been great being friends with you for 10 years.
I appreciate that immensely. I remember one of the first times we met, and I remember thinking the crypto land needs more Dan Moorheads in it to be successful. So thank you. I feel mutually.
Awesome. So, you know, thinking back 10 years ago when you came to join a group of very eclectic people, super libertarians. We had a CFTC commissioner, so Chairman Benham, so continuing that theme of his agency being at the forefront, we were talking about all kinds of wild things. What surprised you of what happened and then what didn't happen?
So I remember Dan used to host a CEO conference, or he still does, but this is when he hosted at his home, and it was a smaller group. Probably 50% of all crypto was represented in that room. And I remember I was very new to crypto and thinking like this is a very eclectic group. And one of the things that stands out in my mind is you did have the kind of almost religious pursuit. And you had those that were taking, I think, a more business pragmatic pursuit. And I remember sitting by a guy, and I was pretty new to crypto, and talking to him about, ended up being Eric Voorhees, and I was talking to him about like what he was building, and he's describing to me how he is building, he has no bank accounts, he pays everyone in Bitcoin, he pays his landlord in Bitcoin, and I admit, I remember thinking at the time, and this is circa 2014, 2015, I remember thinking this guy's crazy. Now, lo and behold, not crazy at all. And I think we're still evolving the industry to a place where that actually makes even more sense. But what stands out to me was the kind of, this industry wouldn't be where it is without that kind of religious pursuit, the belief in the capital B belief. And I think we owe all of those people a great debt of gratitude.
Yeah, I agree. And you were a pioneer in VoIP, voice over IP. And now you're in the money over IP business. What are the similarities?
Bleeding edge or leading edge, I'm not sure. I did VoIP before Skype came along, which meant that I was on the bleeding edge, not the leading edge. Hopefully with crypto, I've always been drawn towards kind of new disruptive technologies. I'm not quite sure where that comes from, but there are similarities, I think. And as Dan and I were talking before this, I was sharing with him a story. In my VoIP era, I ended up sitting down with the CEO of AT&T. And for him, the idea of IP-based voice was also somewhat religiously objectionable. And he was talking about how VoIP would never reach the last mile. The kind of the POTS, plain old telephone service, the last mile would always be twisted pair, but we would use IP at the backbone layer and those kinds of things. And I remember just sitting there thinking like, okay, that's nice that he thinks that, but like this is why companies like AT&T get disrupted. I feel the same way when I hear Jamie Dimon say, 10 years ago, Bitcoin will be gone in 10 years, or Bitcoin's a fraud. And look, I think all of these journeys play out over a long time, but I think all of us are well aware that, the last mile of voice is almost all IP now. And I think we will reach a point where maybe a lot of the money over IP might be backbone based and institutions or trading, but it's going to feed out into the last mile, if you will, and it might take a decade, it might take 2 decades, and it might start in markets where currencies have been debased more often than the US dollar necessarily. But I think the inevitable march of pursuit of these technologies can't be stopped.
Yeah, I agree. Now if we zoom into Ripple, I've even been chastised by you for confusing Ripple Labs and XRP. Could you help the audience know essentially, what is their XRP, what's it do, what's Ripple Labs, and how should people understand it?
Yeah. I'll start by saying that one of the big sensitivities about Ripple, when people conflate XRP as Ripple, I bristle because to some degree that's at the heart of the lawsuit with the SEC. Like their contention that XRP is a security. It's like, no. You can own XRP, you don't own Ripple. We raised a seed round of funding in 2012 and a Series A and et cetera. I mean, Ripple at its core is an enterprise software infrastructure player selling blockchain and crypto solutions to the enterprise. We started with financial institutions, banks, started with cross-border payments. We now have custody, stablecoin. We acquired a prime broker earlier this year. And so, we're continuing to expand the suite of services, but it's all at the infrastructure layer from a B2B point of view. XRP, we are the most interested party in XRP's success. We own 41% of the XRP that exists. We care immensely about the vibrancy, the utility, the liquidity of the XRP ecosystem. But the nice thing is, compared to when I went to that crypto CEO conference at your home over a decade ago, the breadth of participants in the XRP ecosystem has changed dramatically. And so Ripple's still the most interested party and the largest party. And anything Ripple does, we want to build products and services that customers love and are happy to pay for, and have the symbiotic relationship of driving liquidity in the XRP ecosystem. If it's doing good things for XRP and customers will pay us for them, that is a magical place for us to be. And honestly, we don't think as much about can we maximize the last dollar of revenue, because if it's driving good things in the XRP ecosystem, that's good for us from a balance sheet point of view over here.
And what have you found to be the most current use cases? What are people using it for?
Well, I actually think I love conferences like this because you do have a lot of entrepreneurs coming up here and talking about real solutions. I think one of the challenges for crypto at large is you don't have that many scaled real world use cases where these technologies are actually improving people's lives in some way. Payments has always been something that I think people have said, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And part of that is because the SWIFT infrastructure is kind of 50 years old. It hasn't changed much. Most people in this room, I'm guessing, have sent a wire transfer at some point overseas, and it takes a long time, and they charge you a lot. I literally just had this experience recently. I'm going through the Wells Fargo, I bank with Wells Fargo. I'm going through the Wells Fargo, I'm wiring like $25,000. And they give me, a fixed exchange rate. I Google on another screen, like I'm just getting screwed, but there's nothing I can really do. And I think it's only a matter of time before you do have, either people accepting crypto directly, or you have just far more efficient and competitive rails. So Ripple started with cross-border payments because that's a really high friction point in terms of cost and speed. We got slowed down in that journey by the SEC. We really couldn't sell into the US market in some other markets for years. And that has unlocked really just in the last 6 to 9 months where some of the biggest banks are kind of like, okay, we can look at these solutions again.
Great. I'd love your thoughts on how the industry's going to organize. There's been a couple different models, right? Bitcoin had the creator ascend into heaven and no longer speak with his disciples, right? And so it never changed. And then you have a lot of protocols have foundations, but they don't have a Ripple Labs type company that's got 1,000 developers building things. You're somewhere in the middle, and I do hear people now say, for other protocols, they wish they had a Ripple Labs type thing that can help build things and advocate, and you've been very bold in pushing back on the regulatory side. Where do you think we are in 5 or 10 years with not just XRP, but Ethereum, even Bitcoin? Is it going to have some kind of governance thing? And I would throw into the mix, we're talking a lot about DATs today. You guys are the original DAT, right? You are the original company that owns a bunch of tokens, right?
Yes.
And so where are we as an industry in 5 or 10 years?
So first of all, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, Ripple has been a fascinating journey and an amazing journey in a lot of ways, but it has been a controversial player at various parts of that journey. As we fast forward to where we are today, I think a lot of people see that there is value in having a champion, a lead voice in some of these things. And we have always tried to think about Ripple as one of the adults in the room of the crypto ecosystem, and really thinking about, even within XRP, there's those that take a maybe more religious view about things. And there always is a balance between amendments to the XRP ledger. It is open source software, and there's been things that have passed on the XRP ledger that Ripple didn't support, which is the nature of open source. But there always has been this tension within XRP about performance that we care very much about. It's very fast per transaction, very low cost per transaction, which makes it great for payments. you could add capabilities, but then you're going to slow it down and it's going to become more expensive. We very much have always believed in a multi-chain world. I think in some ways, by the way, the other original DAT, Consensus, meaning the Joe Lubin's company, in some ways was very analogous to Ripple, thinking about how do we drive the success of the Ethereum ecosystem. They were investing in a ton of different companies. You remember that chapter well, I'm sure. But I think what we have found is it makes sense to have anchor players within an ecosystem. I certainly think Bitcoin's going to continue to be successful. I think Ethereum's going to continue to do well. Solana's going to continue to do well. I do think the long tail of activity, and I've gotten a lot of shit over the years for saying things like, I said like 8 years ago that 99% of cryptos would go to zero. That's when there were like 2,000 that were kind of tracked. So I thought maybe there's 20 that mattered. And I've been very wrong because now I think there's at least 100x that number. But I still do think that there'll be a kind of the tall head versus the long tail that I think most of the value will accrue to the top X number. I'll leave X as a undefined number.
Yeah, but not one.
Not one, for sure. And back to my point of I believe very strongly in a multi-chain world. I hold multiple cryptos personally. Ripple, the vast majority of our holdings are denominated in XRP, but we do own some other cryptos just for various reasons.
And could you give the audience some stats on how performant it is, how many transactions per second? Because those are the Achilles heels of Bitcoin and Ethereum not being able to process.
To scale, yeah. So the XRP ledger on a per transaction basis is a fraction of a penny. It's 0.00002 cents per transaction and the ledger completes a transaction every 3 to 4 seconds. So by contrast, particularly in these surge markets, you've had Bitcoin transactions that cost $50 to complete a transaction. It takes 8 minutes. And again, please don't interpret that as me being negative towards Bitcoin. Bitcoin's going to be great to solve one use case. ETH's going to be great to solve a different use case. XRP is going to, and I think the reason why you're seeing, a significant increase in developer activity around the XRP ledger is because people are saying, oh, for this kind of use case, XRP is great. And there's also times when people come to me and they want to do something with Ripple, they want to do something with XRP, and I've said to them, XRP is not that's not the right technology stack for you to look at. It's just for whatever reason their pursuit of a vertical, it just doesn't make a ton of sense. And to me, that's okay. It's a big pie to grow.
Well, no, and the analog I always think about is there's not one internet company.
Right.
There's half a dozen really huge ones, a lot of medium-sized ones, thousands of small ones. So there's definitely space for a lot of different protocols.
I actually do think that's the right comparison. The idea that there's one internet doesn't really make sense. Look, I imagine most people in this room probably use Google Chrome. Well, there are smaller, that you've got Safari, you've got Opera, you've got
Brave browser.
Brave, yes. You've got. Anyway, I think this idea, and yes, you may have consolidation, and today the Bitcoin dominance index is around 60%, I think. Okay, that's great. There's a lot of value, and I think Ripple's always tried to champion, if crypto does well, that's going to probably be really good for Ripple. And so we've invested almost $3 billion in other crypto initiatives. Now, some of those are XRP specific. Some of those are limited partners in funds that support lots of different things. But we think if crypto does well, it's good for us, and it's part of the reason you alluded to this, but we felt it was so important to fight the fight with the SEC and the last administration because it was important for crypto. And if somebody didn't fight, that was going to be bad for our industry.
Well, yeah, that's definitely on people's minds because it's very high profile. And thank you for, taking that on. Could you share, what you're doing and what the result is, and especially for the industry as a whole?
What we're doing, what we did,
what you did with the fight with the SEC.
The key contention by the SEC was this idea that XRP in and of itself is a security. And obviously, if XRP is a security, it's kind of like, okay, well, wait a minute, where does that slippery slope stop? And that kind of means that, well, is every crypto a security and thus regulated? And some people would argue, well, if it's a security, so what? Well, that means that you have a whole different set of rules in the US that do affect cost per transaction, speed per transaction, and thus the utility of crypto goes way down. In my opinion, the SEC did not act, and I'm quoting one of the judges involved actually in one of her opinions wrote, that the SEC was not, quote, following a faithful allegiance to the law. I think it was a power grab. And I didn't hold back in kind of suggesting that the then chair of the SEC, a guy named Gary Gensler, was grossly going beyond what the remit of the SEC was. Thankfully, we had a court that agreed. And that did, I think, set a reset. The election, of course, and Paul Atkins, I think, has been extremely constructive in trying to work with the industry to figure out, what is a better way to do it. We couldn't get meetings with the SEC back then. We couldn't actually meet with the White House either, anybody in the administration. I think I've been to the White House 4 times this year. I've met with the SEC after the lawsuit was over. I was invited in to talk about, okay, how do we work going forward? It's just, I cannot emphasize how dramatic the headwinds were and now how dramatic the tailwinds are. And I actually, for what it's worth, I think we are still, if the largest economy in the world goes from headwinds to tailwinds, I think we are underpriced that shift. And I think that'll play out over the 6, 12, 18 months ahead.
No, I agree. I think it's super important. And you and I were on a panel about 2-3 years ago when you're in the middle of your lawsuit. And the moderator asked something that even I hadn't put together. He said that 19 out of the top 20 protocols in blockchain were physically located outside of the United States of America. And you were the only one, idiot to be in the United States and being sued.
I mean, obviously, I don't think we're an idiot, but there was a period of time, there was a sad reality, and I'm sure, Pantera has been one of the most successful investors in crypto land, but the advice I used to give some of the entrepreneurs you backed was, don't incorporate in the United States. And it's not because we're trying to circumvent. I mean, again, you had, I'm quoting Gary Gensler. By the way, now you're getting me riled up. I get all fired up about this. You had Gary Gensler out there pontificating about how the crypto's the Wild West. You're like, that is the furthest thing from the truth. The people I knew were trying to give us clear rules, help us understand those rules, and don't just sue us without actually providing that guidance. And so, it took a while, but we're finally in a happier place. And Ripple was fortunate to be in a position where we could fight the fight. We did think about just moving to offshore and kind of saying, to hell with our US business. For 4 years, we were still based in the US, but during those 4 years, we basically didn't sign any contracts in the US. And we signed scores of contracts with financial institutions overseas. Now, the US is still the regulatory North Star for many Western economies. And so they look to the US. And so it hurt our business across Europe, less so in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. But it was a tough years.
It was. And actually, I wanted to point out for the audience that the US government's stance on blockchain is literally the polar opposite of the rest of the protocols we call the internet, right?
Yeah.
The US government literally built ARPANET and gave all kinds of safe harbors.
Al Gore invented it.
Yeah, Al Gore invented it. That was nice of him. But they gave safe harbors in Congress, 8.25% discount for Amazon versus a real bookstore with bricks and mortar. And all of the biggest internet companies in the free world are in the US, and they were scaring all the protocols out of the US.
Again, you're preaching to the choir on this one. I still think there are going to be, this to me does represent the future of rewiring financial infrastructure. It's cheaper, it's faster, it's more auditable. Those are all things that the government should care about, and it's good for consumers, it's good for businesses, it's good for growing the economy. Why we had a period of time that the US government was anti these technologies makes no sense to me. But we're past it, and so we're entrepreneurs that build for the future. So
in building, you're doing a lot of M&A work. Could you share some of your thoughts on that?
So we decided kind of at the end of last year, beginning of this year, that there's a moment in time we thought Ripple was in an advantageous position. We were going to play offense with acquisitions. We've announced, I think, 3 acquisitions this year, the biggest of which was the largest non-bank prime broker called Hidden Road. Now, the Hidden Road does crypto and non-crypto activity, but if you want, I'm going to use generically, if you want the Citadels of the world to lean in and participate, you need counterparties and prime brokers that actually can service Citadel's needs. If you don't have those, then the Citadels of the world can't lean in at the scale. And Hidden Road was doing quite well, but their balance sheet, relatively speaking, was small to service some of the biggest, the Jane Streets, some of the biggest players out there. Ripple has a big balance sheet, and since announcing that acquisition in, I think, May, we basically 3x their revenue run rate, which they were already doing quite well and profitable. And we're serving some of the larger customers, serving customers that already were more broadly. So that's going really well. We bought Rail, which is one of the largest stablecoin payments companies, kind of based out of Toronto. That was a deal we just announced in August, and working on a couple more right now. So
Great.
It's been a busy year on that front.
And we've been investors for 12 years. A lot of our LPs are also invested directly in Ripple Labs. You've shared a lot of your thoughts on all these tender offers and how much you've bought back. What can you share with our audience?
I mean, kind of a little known fact that we're, not that we're covert about it, but we've actually repurchased over 25% of the company. We've spent $4 billion buying shares back from our shareholders. We haven't needed to go public, and so we haven't prioritized that. And the way we kind of solve the shareholder liquidity problem is by just buying back shares at increasingly higher prices. I mean, to some degree, SpaceX has been doing that. And so, we just yesterday closed another $1 billion tender offer, valuing Ripple at about $40 billion.
Excellent. Is there anything you can say about whether you will go public?
Look, we're not in a hurry. Obviously, the window's open. I will say as a very positive thing, I think a watershed moment for the crypto industry was the Circle IPO.
Yep.
It went from, I think people were worried about how that was going because it was during the Tariff Liberation Day event and the public markets weren't sure, and to see how oversubscribed it was and see how, and even now I think it's a $35 billion company. I think that is phenomenal for crypto broadly. Obviously some of the other ones that have gone public, whether it's Bullish or Gemini, haven't gone quite as, they've done well, but not quite as well. But because Ripple, today we have, just shy of $4 billion on the balance sheet. And so we're not in a hurry to go public, and we feel like we can play offense from an M&A point of view and continue to stay private. There's some benefits to being private. At some point, I would imagine we'll knock on the public markets door, but that's not today.
Well, until then, we will still be your investor. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.